his inaugural address, Dr. Nagaraj Garu mentioned that this conference is it will start a new strand of history. The glimpse of that, we already see in Dr. Meenakshi ji's, distinguished talk today. That we are able to relook at our history and identify and re-narrativize the evolution of various aspects of our life will, without fail, lead to many new strands of history. And the evolution of judicial systems is one such. It may be the most important anchor of decolonization, and from that standpoint, from the colonial encounter standpoint, this strand will be very important to watch for in the coming days. With this, we now step to the paper presentations of the day. As all of you may have already seen on the schedule, we've had several paper presenters. We received a lot of nominations, and then Dr. Nagaraj Garu, over a period of many weeks, identified after a great rigor scholars whose papers stood out in rigor, in perspective, and in substance, and in the relevance of this paper presentation of this conference. In that, I now call upon Dr. Rabi Ranjan Sen. He is the Associate Professor and Head in the Department of History in Katwa College.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And he's also involved in educational administration as President, Vidya Bharati in South Bengal. He writes on historical, social, and educational issues and is deeply knowledgeable in many aspects of Bengal history. And Dr. Rabi Ranjan is going to speak on the historical study of IKS in the Nationalist Historiography as reflected in the writings of Radha Kumud Mookerjee. Just as R.C. Majumdar is one name that inspires a civilizational confidence, Radha Kumud Mookerjee is another, although not as much known in the larger fraternity as R.C. Majumdar ji, but equally important. And Sri Rabi Ranjan ji is going to speak on a specific aspect of his work. Sri Rabi Ranjan.
Thank you, Shivakumarji. Our Indica Kulapati, Dr. Nagaraj Paturiji, Dr. Meenakshi Jain, and all the other dignitaries and participants in the seminar present here. My paper, as Shivakumarji said, is entitled Historical Study of IKS in Nationalist Historiography as Reflected in the Writings of Radha Kumud Mookerjee. So, in a way, it's very fitting that the paper follows Dr. Meenakshi Jain's excellent presentation, where she laid out the contours of the pre-British Indian juridical system, which had been obtaining from the ancient times till the time of the British, and how the British uprooted that system. So from there, we now come to what was described by Dr. Paturi in the first session as the fight back of the roar of the lion in return. So we have seen from the presentations earlier also how the British colonial writers, historians distorted the Indian ethos, and they presented it in a negative way. After the initial period of Orientalism, when there was a positive recognition of some of the aspects of the Indian culture, there was a sense of wonderment, there was a sense of awe at what they were seeing. So this was at the very initial period, and when they tried to get into it. And after that, particularly after the period of the 1857 revolt, when the empire proper takes over, there was a kind of shift in that, and it was in that period that they tried to impose the Western education system, the judicial system, and everything else. So that phase is best represented in historiography by the writings of James Mill, influenced by, of course, the 18th century European Enlightenment. The prevailing belief of this time was that the West had progressed in the material sphere because of its deployment of reason. This was the criteria they had employed. And India was backward precisely because its culture and civilization lacked this aspect. So this was matched by the evangelical viewpoint of John Shaw, who followed Lord Cornwallis as the Governor General, and John Shaw's friend Charles Grant wrote that the adoption of Christianity and Western education is needed to change, he writes, the hideous state of Indian society. Those were his words. So this also found its support in the rationalist utilitarian view at that time, which came to the same conclusion but through a different circuitous route. And James Mill himself was a follower of the utilitarian philosophy, Bentham, and to him Indian culture was static, degraded. Only hope of reforming it was through an infusion of Western knowledge. His History of India was in 6 volumes. It was hugely influential, not only in the academic or the thought sphere, but also in the sphere of policy and administration, because it was compulsory reading for the cadets of the Indian civil service. And especially the second volume in 500 volumes, which in 500 pages, which dealt with Hindu religion and culture. This was very influential, and it set out to prove that the Hindu possessed the qualities of a slave and suffered from a severe deficit of character. So this proved to be in future the main basis for the British policy and British thought on the nature of Indian civilization, and shaped their attitude towards India and Indians. Other writers like Mount Stuart, Elphinstone, V.A. Smith, etc., though they were somewhat sympathetic in some of their views towards the Indians, but they were also influenced by that view, in the sense that they often tried to show without any evidence that Indians had borrowed most of their culture from the Greeks, or from at least from other Asian civilizations like Babylon, Assyria, Persia. R.C. Majumdar says, wherever there was the least similarity between Indian and foreign ideas, Indians were taken to be the borrowers. The epics were supposed to be indebted to Homer. Indian drama, mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy were from the Greeks, and even Krishna cult was taken from Christ, etc. So R.C. Majumdar very clearly says that these conclusions were not only on the basis of bad logical deductions, but they were actively because of a prejudiced mind. Those were his words. The first generation of Indian historians in response, which came out, they were also a product of course, the newly introduced Western education, and they quickly adapted the European methods of the examination of sources, the scientific nature of history writing, etc., which they borrowed from the European ideals. But at the same time, they were also deeply resentful of this kind of attitude. And many of them were also influenced by Swami Vivekananda's successful defense of Indic religion, etc. in the West. Many of them were also influenced by the Swadeshi phase. For example, now we come to Radha Kumud Mookerjee himself, who, as was said in the introduction, was a very important, and I would say one of the most important historians of the nationalist writings. He was deeply influenced by Swami Vivekananda, by the Swadeshi movement. He was a product of the Dawn Society founded by Satish Chandra Mukherjee in 1902. And he participated in the lectures as a student of Presidency College at that time. He participated in the lectures. Sometimes he gave lectures. He wrote articles for Dawn magazine. And we know how this Dawn Society was later very influential. It produced people like Rajendra Prasad, Binoy Sarkar, etc. And in the Swadeshi movement, the aspect of education was symbolized by the founding of the National Council of Education and the Bengal National College, of which Aurobindo Ghosh was the principal. Radha Kumud served as a professor of history in that college. His first significant contribution in Indian history was his history of Indian shipping. Before that, Elphinstone had his writings claimed that the Indians did not have much contribution to shipping. They were just auxiliaries of the Greeks, Arabs, etc. In spite of significant evidence to the contrary in the periplus of the Erythraean Sea. So Radha Kumud here points out that for full 30 centuries, India stood out as the very heart of the old world and maintained her position as one of the foremost maritime countries. So here also it is connected with indigenous knowledge related to shipbuilding, shipping proper, commerce, etc. And he brings out very important facts for the first time to show how Indian shipping not only dominated this entire area from Africa to Malaysia, and also the Greeks, Arabs, Chinese, etc. were to some extent the auxiliaries of the Indian merchants here. So he brings out a very important aspect. So apart from the Indian achievements in material, culture, shipping, etc., from the imperialist historians, Hindu religion, culture, and the knowledge system was under threat, as we had pointed out before, and this aspect had to be defended by the nationalist writers. While the discussions on the nationalist historians usually have focused on their neutrality or otherwise, how much were they influenced, how much were they political, etc. Those are the current debates on the nationalist historiography. But their role in bringing out these aspects of the Indian knowledge system, its goals, its objectives, and in a modern historical way. The methodology of their writings, of course, is in the current historical terminology and methodology. So this aspect is very important here. Radha Kumud studies institutions. Shipping was one of the major institutions. The second institution is local self-government. And in that, regarding his book on local self-government, Lord Haldane says, "You have brought out the facts establishing the existence of a highly organized system of local self-government in ancient India, so completely the outcome of the spirit and traditions of the communities concerned." As we have seen with regard to the judicial system, this was also an indigenous expression of the communities concerned, not top down, but from the bottom, the system of local self-government. And Lord Haldane also points to that aspect. So completely the outcome of the spirit and tradition of the communities concerned that it survives through changes in sovereignty and even through revolutions. Now, to discuss his presentation on the Indic knowledge system, I would look primarily at three of his most important works: Men and Thought in Ancient India, Ancient Indian Education, Brahmanical and Buddhist, and his masterpiece essay for which he is the most well known, The Fundamental Unity of India. In his Men and Thought in Ancient India, he says that though many foreign elements of thought have contributed to Indian civilization, yet its basis was given by the Vedic, which has continued through all changes amid its different phases. He attributed this civilization to be the joint work of rishis and kings, and discussed the contribution of eminent thinkers and kings as a selective representation. The first in this category is Yajnavalkya. I think this is the only historically attempted detailed life sketch of Yajnavalkya, which he has brought out in about 25 pages with its sources from the Shatapatha Brahmana, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, etc. So he says that Yajnavalkya is a typical embodiment of all that was best and highest in Vedic culture and civilization. And in this discussion of this personality, he brings out how the knowledge system founded by the rishis and patronized by the kings shaped Indian civilization and beyond. In this essay, he attempts a historical life sketch brought out on those sources and says, the biography of Yajnavalkya is practically the cultural history of his country in his times. Apart from the biographical details, the famous debate at Raja Janak's court, he notes the educational cultural conditions and opportunities of the country as illustrated in the life of Yajnavalkya, where he discusses the gurukuls, the wandering scholars, who he says in the course of their wanderings would naturally meet other scholars and engage in exchange of views and often in animated discussions. He discusses the relationship of the rishis with the kings and how this mutual relationship fostered intellectual life in the country. And in this short essay, he discusses the social and political conditions in which the human mind, I am citing, the human mind in India was enabled to achieve some of the greatest triumphs in the pursuit of truth and the solution of the mysteries of existence. In the next essay, he gives a historical sketch of the life of Buddha and discusses the Indian view of Buddha's life and work. He goes on to discuss Ashoka, who he says that his empire was the outshaping of Indian thought with a capital T. In its best, in its widest range and synthesis, one might see in it the world that India would shape if it were left to her. He sees next Samudragupta as the ideal traditional Kshatriya who embodied the ideal of kingship in ancient India, who must extend his authority up to the limits of the country. And in Harsha, he sees attributes of both Ashoka and Samudragupta, great in peace and great in war. He was also coming to the next work, among the first to systematically and extensively study the Indian theory of knowledge, its proponents, and its means of transmission through education in his monumental work on ancient Indian education. In the introduction, he outlines his approach to education in ancient India as being the outcome of the Indian theory of knowledge, and thus a part of its corresponding scheme of life and values. He says that the Indian knowledge system gives a particular angle of vision, a sense of perspective and proportion in which the material and the moral, physical and spiritual, the perishable and permanent interests and values of life are clearly defined and strictly differentiated. In this work, he brings out the key concepts and terms used in the Vedas, their significance, and also the central importance of the yajna as a symbol of creation, which is at the center of the Vedic system and may be understood as education of man in self-sacrifice. He brings out the importance of the two subjects, dharma and brahma, as being the subject matter of the karma kanda and the jnana kanda respectively. He goes on to discuss in extensive detail the Vedic system of education with its means of knowledge, its modes of transmission, the debates, relationship with other sections of society, notably the kings, courts, etc. He also cites Bodhayan, etc. He then separately discusses education in the sutra literature, epics in the time of Panini, Kautilya, the systems of philosophy, yoga, including its premises, practices, and processes, as also some of the typical educational institutions, along with industrial and vocational education. In the second part of the book, again in 12 chapters, he extensively discusses the Buddhist system of education with its monasteries, its universities, etc. No other historical work has brought out in such detail education as obtained in ancient India, along with its theory of knowledge and transmission. His Fundamental Unity of India, brought out in 1914, though a very slim work, remains the book for which he is most well known today. The question of the unity of India drew his attention from the beginning, and he continued to elaborate on this question from his earliest work to the last. The British colonial writers had asserted that India was not a country but an amalgamation of small states and separate cultures and civilizations. The book was a rejoinder to this thesis and showed that the fundamental idea of the unity of Indian civilization is rooted in the very culture of the country, and the ideal of an all-India empire was the basis for Indian nationalism in the past. He extensively studied the Sanskrit and Pali literature to show the ideal of oneness of the country, not only in political and administrative texts, but also in the sacred complexes scattered all over India, which make up a single whole. He discusses the pilgrimages starting from the Vanaparva of the Mahabharata to the Puranic lists, the sutras, etc., the pilgrimages of each of the sampradayas, which make up a whole encompassing the entire subcontinent. So this book goes into the very essence of Indian nationhood, and very significantly, coming to what is very relevant for us today, also shows how the knowledge traditions prove the unity of the civilization. So it was not only the geography or the political references or the administrative references, but it is also what we are today saying IKS, the Indian knowledge system, which show the unity, the geographical, the civilizational unity of the whole. Elaborating on this point in his preface to Local Self-Government in Ancient India, he says, I am quoting from him, "The truth is that India is fundamentally one, physically and culturally. I have very often found that the literary and epigraphic evidence, the law books," it's a very pertinent citation for this conference, please listen. "The literary and epigraphic evidence, the law books and the inscriptions support and explain one another in spite of their differences in date and locality. So throughout the different regions, they form a complete system in itself. Other nationalist writers too have discussed the geographical and cultural factors uniting the country. But using the Indic knowledge system with its system of bhashyas, upabhashyas and tikas encompassing all the regions of the subcontinent as a means of demonstrating the unity of the civilization is perhaps his unique contribution. Ramsay MacDonald had incidentally written the preface to this book, The Fundamental Unity of India. Ramsay MacDonald, who later became the Prime Minister of UK, at that time he was just the Labour leader. And it's a very interesting preface. He says that in this little book, he attempts to lay the only foundation upon which an Indian historical school can rest. If India is a mere geographical expression, a mere collection of separate peoples, traditions, and tongues existing side by side, but with no sense of nationhood in common, Indian history cannot be the record of the evolution of a civilization. It can be nothing more than an account of raids, conflicts, relations of conquerors and conquered. That this is the common view is only too true. Imagine a British political leader sitting in London is admitting this, that this is the common view is only too true, that a superficial view, that a superficial view of India lends all its weight to that view is only too apparent. That it is the view of many of the present governors of India is proclaimed without secrecy from Ceylon to Afghanistan. MacDonald also goes on to say that India and Hinduism are organically related as body and soul. I wonder how many political leaders, and especially a foreign political leader, would go out to make this kind of a statement today. So in conclusion, I would say that it would be very simplistic to see his works as some of the critiques of the nationalist historiography has characterized them as just a reaction to colonialism. So it was definitely it was a rejoinder, a response, but it was more than that. It was not merely a reaction as is often claimed by some of the historians, but it is also a product of deep insight and understanding of the Indic knowledge systems. So there is also a need, of course, today when we discuss the nationalist historiography, we also need to discuss some of their limitations. So if we come to Radha Kumud Mookerjee, say for example, some of the limitations I would also say is that one, his uncritical acceptance of the Aryan invasion theory, which at that time was the norm. We need to be careful about those when we prescribe his writings, and the students also need to be sensitized because he has to be situated in the context of those times. Secondly, his use of some of the problematic terms like colonizing, colonialism with regard to the spread of the Vedic culture in the subcontinent. His liberal use of phrases like colonizing of South India, etc. So in today's aspects, those kind of usages would be very problematic and would create more problems. So we have to be sensitive to the usage of those terms. And also, his use of some of the outdated racial terminology drawing from B.S. Guha's work, racial elements in the Indian population. So, however, the significant aspect which I would like to point out is that which he also says throughout his works, that we need to go deeper. We need an insight, a keen insight to understand the Indian civilization and culture, and not merely a superficial view which we see prevalent in most of the current or the post-1960s historiography. And Sister Nivedita, in many of her works like The Footfalls of Indian History, etc., she has used this word, the inner eye, that it is the inner eye which can discern the workings of the civilization, the evolution of the civilization through the ages. Radha Kumud was also influenced by, of course, Vivekananda and also Sister Nivedita, whom he cites in some of his works. He cites her writings also. And though he hasn't used this term, the inner eye, but he uses insight, the term insight, in almost the same way, that insight into the civilization is needed to know the history of its evolution. So this is something which today we can definitely profit by, and which today we can analyze, revisit the nationalist historiography, recognizing and transcending their limitations in the context of their times, taking whatever is positive from them, and setting the path for a new kind of historiography as was outlined in the first initial inaugural session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabi Ranjan ji, for that insight on Sri Radha Kumud Mookerjee's work. I hope with this, a new interest on his work will start, and we must have the kind of focus that Sri R.C. Majumdar ji got in the last couple of decades. I think that kind of a focus needs to come on Radha Kumud Mookerjee as well. We have scope for just one question.
So, since we have time, if there are any questions, or if somebody would like to add something, since there are no questions. Yes, sir.
Hello. Not a question. It is just an appreciation in behalf of the organizers. This is exactly a role model paper presentation. Exactly what we wanted. Exactly what we expected from a historian and historiographer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nagaraj Garu, very much. And I would also appreciate both you and Indica, all the organizers, along with, of course, Dr. Shiv Kumar ji and Srinivas ji for arranging such a lovely conference, for inviting me here, and for giving us all the opportunity to participate in this wonderful session of 2 days. Thank you.
Dhanyawad. On this wonderful note,